Assalamualaikum, a very good morning and welcome to everybody to Masterclass 6, latest trends on climate governance. My name is Tengku Marina. I am a member of the Climate Governance Council Malaysia, and I'm very pleased to be here today to welcome our presenters from Climate Governance Initiative. Rosie Ward, she is the engagement manager who is responsible for making sure that CGI is present in ASEAN markets. And of course, Emily Farnworth needs no introduction because you've seen her on the last few days presenting and engaging with all of you over the last few days during the summit. So today, I guess, Emily, you'll take us through, and then, Rosie will take us through, and then Emily will then take us on the principles of the Climate Governance Initiative. So I guess, it's a small group, so we will be putting you all into groups later on for an exercise. So, we hope you will participate actively. And but before we begin, can I have a show of hands of how many of you are board directors? Only one? Okay, sorry, I'm also a board director. oh dear, okay, but never mind, that will be interesting. Come, Lynn, come, please. So that will be interesting to see what the outcome of the dilemma is later on. Okay. So without further delay, I'd like to pass on to Rosie, who will take us through today's masterclass. Thank you. Over to you, Rosie.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and it's wonderful to be here. As Marina so kindly introduced, I'm Rosie Ward, and I'm here with my colleague Emily Farnworth. And just to sort of give a quick overview of what we're going to cover today, we'll start off with some context setting, so I'm just going to give a brief introduction to our organization, which is the Climate Governance Initiative. I'll then touch a little bit on recent trends in sustainability in the region and some of the sort of corporate governance frameworks which drive our organization. Emily's then going to give a deep dive into one of those trends and into one of those frameworks, which are the World Economic Forum's 8 Principles of Effective Climate Governance. We're then going to give all of you an opportunity to sort of tackle your own real life board dilemma and think about the actions that you might take. And then we'll wrap everything up at the end. But first, to give a little bit of background information on the Climate Governance Initiative. So we were founded back in 2019 out of an awareness, really, that while there were quite a few organizations at the time which had been established with the purpose of educating executives on the climate crisis and how to tackle that, there were very few organizations which had been established for the purpose of educating independent non-executive directors, who are the individuals that really bear the responsibility for thinking about the long-term success of their companies and mitigating risks and capturing all of the economic opportunities out there. And so I think our mission and our vision do a really good job of capturing that history and highlighting what we were established to further. So our mission is to mobilize boards to accelerate the transition to net zero and build climate resilience, and we're driven by a vision that a critical mass of boards proactively govern their organizations to ensure that they fully contribute to resolving the global climate challenge. We're lucky enough to have grown tremendously throughout the past 6 years. So today we have CGI chapters like CGM in 33 countries. And we have 33 chapters in over 70 countries because many of our chapters cover more than just one country. And all of those chapters together now have over 100,000 members, which is tremendous. Now, all of our chapters are a little bit different, but they're really united by the fact that they are all established to further the 8 Principles of Effective Climate Governance that the World Economic Forum put out. And they do that sort of through an array of events. Some are in person, some focus on networking, some are also online. So we have a suite of webinars that our chapters host. And then there's also a huge focus on education. So our website has a climate governance hub, which includes a suite of resources that our partner organizations have curated, as well as our chapters. We put out periodic case studies, and we also have a course on the principles of climate governance and climate in the boardroom, which is about 30 minutes long, and you do get a certificate at the end of that. So subtle plug to go and take a look at that course. But I first really wanted to ground this presentation in a quick discussion just on the general purpose of corporate governance frameworks and climate governance frameworks in particular. As we're sort of all experiencing today, unfortunately, capital markets are facing a suite of structural changes, economy-wide shocks like the COVID pandemic, and a suite of emerging risks, among which climate change is definitely one of the largest. And corporate governance codes and principles and policies have really developed in tandem with these market-wide trends to try and ensure that capital markets can not only continue to function in this environment, but really respond to some of the crises that our economy and world is facing today. And a really good example of one of these corporate governance frameworks is the ASEAN Corporate Governance Scorecard. So this is an instrument for assessing corporate governance practices of publicly listed companies in 6 markets, which are Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. And it has an array of criteria regarding shareholder rights and equitable treatment, transparency and disclosure, board responsibilities, and most recently also sustainability and resilience. It was developed by the ASEAN Capital Markets Forum with support from the Asian Development Bank in 2011. It was first reviewed in 2017 and most recently between 2021 and 2023. And those most recent revisions incorporated developments in ASEAN capital markets and recent corporate governance codes, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about, as well as some updated global corporate governance principles like the G20 Principles of Corporate Governance, and Emily's going to talk a little bit more about some of those global principles. So on the regulation side, I first wanted to talk a little bit about sustainability disclosures and recent regulations regarding those in the area. And I know that I'm sort of talking to a room of experts in local disclosure regulations, at least in the jurisdictions that you operate in. And so I'm not going to go into detail on any of these, although I'm happy to share the slides. But I've really just included these all here to paint the overall picture that all of the 6 jurisdictions, which are included in the ASEAN Corporate Governance Scorecard, require or recommend some kind of sustainability-related disclosure. And regulations are really shaping positive corporate behavior. And as you can see in this graph here, while only about 14% of listed companies across ASEAN are disclosing some kind of sustainability-related disclosure, they actually make up about 70% of market cap. So the biggest companies across ASEAN are reporting on sustainability in some capacity. Likewise, all of the 6 jurisdictions have at least some provision which clearly articulates the responsibility of the board to take climate into account. And this has also materialized in a couple interesting ways that I wanted to quickly highlight. So one of those is that many companies are actually establishing separate board committees with the sole responsibility of thinking about climate. And so this graph shows us that about 5% of companies that are listed in ASEAN markets have established a committee, but they make up, once again, a little bit of a higher proportion. They actually make up 27% of companies by market cap. And then for a final bit of context, I also think this is a really interesting graphic, and it shows that about 18% of companies across ASEAN by market cap have started to tie their executive compensation strategy to sustainability and the performance of their companies on ESG matters. So that's enough sort of background setting from me. I'm now going to pass it off to Emily to dive into trends in corporate governance principles, and particularly the World Economic Forum's 8 principles of effective climate governance, which really drive our organization. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rosie. That's really, really helpful scene setting. And hopefully, as Rosie has said, I'm sure some of that's very familiar to you. What I wanted to go into now is just to take a little bit of a look into the work that we've been doing through the principles of climate governance that were produced through the World Economic Forum process. So there's a QR code which takes you to the detailed download. That's got a lot more information in the document, which alongside the overview of the principles also provides useful questions for boards. So it may be helpful for you to have that reference to reflect on the session this morning, but also just to say that it may or may not be helpful in the context of the exercise that we're going to be getting you all involved in this morning's session as well. So the process that we went through in order to develop the principles involved interviews with executives and non-executives of boards around the world in multiple sectors. And it was really an amalgamation, if you like, of all of that input that led to a response to the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure Recommendations, which has a kind of specific section on governance, on corporate governance in it. And it was a response to that set of recommendations that helped to evolve actually what specifically does that requirement mean? What is it going to be clearly articulated in the context of good practice on boards if the requirements of the TCFD were fully implemented? And so that was distilled into these 8 different principles. As you'll have heard, if some of you have been either following online or have been here this week, we are in the process of looking through a revision of the principles. They were initially launched in 2019. The world has changed a lot since then. Although we think the framework is still probably pretty solid, we do want to make sure that we can refresh. And also, the Climate Governance Initiative is working on a navigator tool that's assessing all of the codes of climate governance and governance more broadly that we're seeing popping up. So Rosie mentioned a number of different codes, both in this region, but also internationally, organizations that are set up to be able to provide just sort of core guidance, if you like, on corporate governance, are implementing climate issues into their code. So we do also want to keep track of that. Alongside the revision of the climate aspects of the Climate Governance Initiative principles, if you like, we're also going to be looking at how do we incorporate nature into this? Do we need to think about different principles, or are these principles still very valid, but we just need different ways of applying them in the context of nature? And therefore, some of the questions that might come up for boards in supporting the implementation of these principles may be also slightly tailored. So again, that's a process that's going to be ongoing over the next 12, 18 months. So we're hoping to be able to provide more guidance on how to integrate nature into all of this. And as, again, many of you in the room will know, with the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures now coming online, and clarity around what exactly that means in terms of implementation is really important. So we want to be able to stay on top of that in the context, in the same way that we develop these principles to focus on the TCFD requirements. We're also going to be looking at the TNFD requirements to make sure that we're aligning on that front. So just to maybe do a little bit of a deeper dive into the principles, the first set kind of just to run through. And we are going to be, in the exercise that we have for you all this morning, we will be wanting to just sort of reflect on this. We're obviously not expecting you all to become experts in a few minutes on all of these things. But hopefully the groupings of some of these things together will help to bring context for the exercise that we have a little later. So the first principle on climate accountability on boards, this really gets to the heart of, all of the principles are relevant in the context of fiduciary duties of board directors. And again, maybe just for clarification, the work that we've done on the principles and the work that we've been doing on governance is very explicitly to do with independent directors or non-executive directors on boards. And the reason for this is that there are a lot of different guidelines and groups and peer networks and learning for executives, so for CEOs, for CSOs, for CFOs, etc. But what we found when we were initially putting the principles together was that there was a real need for the independent directors to have guidance. And because independent directors are there on boards to think about the long term, they have a real stewardship role in the context of being able to come down to the front. Those of you that are coming in, there's plenty of seats down here. The role that directors have as sort of that long-term stewards for boards to create that value in the longer term. And so actually they're there to ask the awkward questions on boards. They're there to be able to make sure that they're steering. So that accountability in terms of the fiduciary duties of independent board directors is really, really critical. Command of the subject is also important, and so forums like this that can help educate independent directors and also those who, I'm sure we have a room full of aspiring directors for sure. So kind of understanding this topic in context of a business is really important. Board directors need to know a lot of different things. Typically, they will have an awful lot of experience of what it means to run a business, and that is at the core what an independent director needs to have good experience and knowledge of, because ultimately, their job is being able to steer the business. But in the context of climate and nature, there's a need also to understand the context of their role in driving and steering the business. What risks and opportunities are there in the context of climate? And I just to also say, I will focus on climate in this session. As I said, we'll come on to nature when we have the revised principles. But I think what's important for board directors, in the same way that they need to learn about artificial intelligence, they need to understand about geopolitics, they need to understand about lots of different issues. Climate is one of those additional issues that they have to think through. So command of the subject is really important. And this doesn't mean to say they have to have a PhD in every single detail that's relevant. They need to understand the core elements, and they need to understand the context of that for their business. So when they're in the boardroom, because often, it may be that they have, 5 minutes on an agenda, very, very busy agenda in a board meeting to be able to kind of get to the point around what the climate risk and opportunity is. So it's really critical that they get to those salient points that they can bring to the board that are relevant. It's no good to kind of bring absolutely every piece of information that they know about this topic. It's about context and it's about materiality. Board structure is also really important. And one of the things that we work on across the initiative is recognizing that sometimes it can be very lonely if the only independent board director on a board of lots and lots of people is the one that understands the risks and opportunities around climate, but is drowned out by lots of other voices on the board that are not as well informed, who don't see the same risk and opportunity. And so one of the things that we're really keen to be doing with this initiative through CGM, through the chapter network that we have around the world, is making sure that there are multiple independent directors sitting on boards, all with the same understanding and knowledge, so that there's multiple voices in the boardroom, not just one sole voice, who can bring the questions, who can bring the perspectives, and to really help support the decision making. Because there are always going to be trade-offs, and unless you have a number of strong voices in a boardroom, the danger is that you may, depending on the nature of the business, it may kind of, okay, let's be more conservative about this, or let's not take that risk, or this doesn't even matter at all. Which obviously we're still in a situation where unfortunately some boards think that way, although thankfully not as many as there were. So the board structure in terms of understanding the role that independents play, but also understanding the role that other members of the board play. So we're very interested in understanding more and more about the General Counsel and understanding the legal issues, the compliance issues, as well as some of the litigation risks that we see on the horizon. Really interested in understanding the role of the Chief Financial Officer, because obviously, ultimately, particularly in terms of disclosure and annual reporting, the role of that financial aspect of the board is increasingly critical. And as we see carbon pricing becoming mandated in more and more sectors around the world, then clarity around reporting and accounting standards and how that's developing is really important. So you can pick every single role on a board and recognize the structure that is needed to make sure the conversation is happening. And then often boards may have specific sustainability committees or ESG committees or environmental committees or all sorts of different sort of subcommittees where you can make sure that the detail is coming up from the management team into those committees to deal with the detail, so that then the chair of the committee can go back to the board with a very specific set of questions or recommendations for decisions or recommendations for investment. And often the subcommittees and the committees are very important because that's where a lot of the detail can come through the board structure rather than coming straight to the board. So thinking through the board structure and the committee structure, and sometimes advisory groups can play a useful role where external voices can come in. So there's many different types of structures that companies can use to make sure that they've got the right information coming in the right way, to make sure the board can focus on their job of making long-term decisions, making strategic decisions, making important investment decisions, etc. But they know that they're making those decisions or making those recommendations building on a lot of information. I'm probably going to have to speed up a little bit to make sure that we get through all this content. But I think it's important context setting. Principle 4 is material risk and opportunity assessment. I think this is probably a little bit more straightforward for a lot of you, so I maybe won't spend as much time on that. It's essentially just understanding understanding and quantifying the risk and opportunity, understanding where the biggest issues are, understanding, what's relevant for the sector. There's plenty of guidance, and I know there's lots of other masterclasses that are talking about that topic, so hopefully you've got a good grounding on that. Strategic integration is one of the more challenging aspects that we're finding, and there's some statistics from a survey that we've done recently that seems to be the thing that's really more challenging for boards. It's about this sort of embedding in a mindset way, but also in a clear quantitative decision-making way. How is an organization actually developing its business strategy so it just takes sustainability issues into account and climate issues into account simply by the nature of their business strategy, their business model, rather than having the business strategy sitting here and the sustainability strategy sitting over here and the two things being in conflict? Or even worst case scenario, the board not really even understanding the sustainability strategy. So this point around strategic integration, this is where the independent board members have got a really important role to play, because they're the ones that can keep pulling the conversation back to, yes, but if this is going to be our business strategy, what's the impact going to be on our climate footprint? Or what about the kind of extreme weather conditions if we decide to kind of make that strategic decision in that particular marketplace? What about that piece of policy that's coming down the track? Incentivization is getting more interest. It's obviously utilized in lots of different ways. Executive pay is the obvious one, or executive shareholding is another one. But increasingly, kind of being more sophisticated about using incentives to make sure you're driving the correct behaviors is really, really important. There's a lot of more scrutiny now as well with various organizations looking at what a company strategy and plan might look like, and then also correlating that towards the executive compensation or the executive incentives, and understanding, how those two things might be interrelated. Executive pay is not the only incentive that you can utilize. There are other ways in which employees might be incentivized all the way through the chain. And I think that's maybe another point to highlight. A lot of focus, obviously the board is mainly going to be there to look at the incentives for the senior executive team. But ultimately, having cascaded incentives all the way through the organization is a very, very helpful way of making sure that everybody in the chain, everybody who's working across the organization understands their role in the ultimate corporate goal and how those things roll up. so that bonuses and pay increases and share offerings, etc., can be linked to performance in a really meaningful way. Reporting and disclosure, again, I think you've had lots and lots of information about this topic. I won't dwell, but ultimately the board is responsible for signing off what's in an annual report. So it goes without saying that unless you have a board that understands what it should be looking for, what it should feel confident about signing off on, then it's really all of the work that the team has done to put the right information together is sort of a little bit meaningless. Audit committees are very important also in this regard. So the chair of the audit committee is a really important role in understanding how, when you have the external auditors come in and provide what they need to, which is a true and fair reflection of the company's accounts, that the board directors can feel confident that is exactly what they're signing off on. And then the final point is exchange. So this idea that no one organization can do everything. Obviously, it's a whole ecosystem of organizations that will drive this. And so whether it's the board or whether it's the board ensuring the organization through its executive teams are engaging with policymakers, engaging with stakeholders, engaging with communities, engaging with civil society, et cetera, then they're not necessarily going to get the information that they need from a broad range of stakeholders. And so it's really important that we have that exchange. Just a quick time check. Are we doing okay? Hopefully. Maybe just to whiz through a couple of slides to feedback on a survey, just to give you a sort of sense as to how we're hearing back from the network's members in the context of how they're taking these principles to their members. The survey that we did, it's now the second year that we've done an annual survey. We also supplement that with other chapter surveys that are going on, but it's just to give you a very quick overview of the sort of scope, if you like, of the survey that we've undertaken to come up with these results. And there are summaries available on the website as well. One of the things that we were really keen to understand is obviously sort of the barriers that people are facing in the boardroom. And inevitably, and it won't be any surprise to you that, for a variety of reasons, sometimes climate isn't necessarily a priority. And as I mentioned earlier, in some respects, given the number of issues that boards have got to deal with, there is some sympathy with this particular issue. But at the same time, there needs to be clarity around, for many organizations, why climate risks and opportunities are so critical for the business strategy. So I think this goes back to the point that unless we have that clarity around the strategy, then it sometimes is more difficult for the boardroom to really prioritize this topic. There are a number of factors that we found that have been really helpful for boards in being able to bring the topic to the board, but also to drive climate action in the boardroom. And again, not necessarily things that are unsurprising, perhaps. I think maybe one thing or maybe two things actually to pull out from this. Transition planning is becoming a very helpful tool, because one of the things that it allows boards to do is set the ambitious goal, in the longer term, and then break down the steps that need to be taken to get to that place. And in understanding that, it allows then some short-term goals to be set based on the same journey that you've got to get to in the longer term. And also, because there are so many different sectors in the transition that are related to one another, it sort of relates a little bit and connects to the collaboration point. So with transition planning, inevitably, for those of you that have been involved in this exercise, quite quickly you get to a place, we can do this bit, but we need, someone else in the value chain to be doing their bit if we're going to be doing this. And so collaboration across value chains and across other stakeholders are really important, becomes absolutely critical. And organizations that are involved in either cross-platforms or cross-sector initiatives, the World Economic Forum has something called the First Movers Coalition, which is for organizations who are particularly in the harder to abate or the heavy industry sectors, so like cement, like shipping, like aviation, like steel. And being part of those coalitions can help share across organizations in the same sector so that they can share pre-competitive information about where they need to get to, but also value chain initiatives that help particular industry sectors look across the value chain. So if you're in the steel industry, for example, being able to to talk to the extractive end of the spectrum as well as the final producers, which might be, say, the construction sector, and understand the opportunities and challenges across that whole value chain, so that then you sitting in a particular part of that can decide, okay, well, what's our role in this transition? How can we help to ensure this whole value chain is starting to green? One of the things, as I said, that we're really interested in understanding are kind of where are we seeing some of the really big gaps and opportunities for influence. I've talked quite a lot about strategy, but actually when you factor in business models to this as well, it starts to become quite important. One of the things that we all understand is very, very difficult about taking climate action. It's not that people don't understand the problem. I think a lot of people now are very, very aware of climate change from a scientific perspective. And if they're not, there's plenty of information that they can go and seek to find out the information. I don't think even in some cases there's necessarily a challenge with the solution that might be available. But where things break down is the cost often. And so really being innovative about different business models in order to make sure that doing something the right way is also going to be doing something in the most profitable way is where the kind of real challenge lies. And so again, the board responsibility for truly embedding the strategy into the organization goes hand in hand with thinking about the business model that the company needs to be thinking about in the longer term. And I know that there are a few different examples. So, for example, there's an organization called DSM. It's based in the Netherlands. It's a specialty chemical company. At the time, they recognized that actually the trajectory of their organization was not necessarily going to be aligned with some sustainability goals that they had. They had a very strong board, and again, it had board members who were, more than one board member who were kind of involved in the conversations and really understood, and a very strong CFO who put in a shadow price on carbon into their decision-making process that really helped them to drive a different kind of decision about where their future business model might need to be. And so they really took a look at wanting to become a more sustainable organization, particularly in the agriculture and the food sector. So they didn't necessarily want to change entirely kind of where they were in the context of the value chain, if you like, but they did want to make sure that they were manufacturing product and selling to customers where there was a genuine gain, if you like, in the context of both their sustainability goals and also looking at their business goals. So we need to learn more about that. We need so if all of you are working in organizations and you have some wonderful examples of good business models, we would absolutely love to hear from you. So that was the end of the kind of like us talking at you bit. I don't know, before I move on to the next part of the session, were there any questions quickly that people had or comments that people had? Great, okay, well, I will move on. So the next session that we're going to go through, and there's quite a few new people that have come into the room. Marina kindly asked the question when we first started, how many of you are sitting on boards as board directors? We have one more, so you're not alone now. And as I said, I think for the rest of you, this will be a good exercise in what it might feel like to be in the boardroom so that you can help make your decision about your career decisions. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through, I'm going to give you some information, and we're going to put you into groups. So where there's spaces at tables, please join one. You might need to gather some chairs together at the back to form some additional groups. I'm going to give you some information, and then at your tables, you are going to be the board. And I'm going to give you a decision that the board is going to be discussing. And between you, you're going to decide on which way you're going to vote as a board. And then Marina is very kindly offered to help with facilitating the feedback from those sessions. I'm going to just do a time check to make sure we give you the right amount of time available to have the discussion. But this is just part of the scene setting. So again, I'm sure I'm telling you information that you already know. But it's just to make sure that everybody's got the same information. Whether or not you decide to be a board member that doesn't know this information is up to you. But I guess the point is that information is available. And basically, it's just outlining this whole point of we have a business as usual trajectory, which is going to take us way above what the scientists have said are safe levels of average global warming. And therefore, we need to really think about, where we're heading and, what the implications are. Also in here are a sense of the current policies that have been pledged, and also some of the optimistic net zero target trajectory projections, if you like, in terms of where we might get to in terms of warming. As all of you know, and as we also understand, if we keep up with the news, is that we're kind of off course of where we need to be. We're already feeling the impacts of climate change. We're already going to be feeling the impacts of climate change for a long, long time to come. And so even if we do get on some of these better trajectories, we know we're still going to have to deal with a significant amount of global warming. So this is just context setting. The dilemma that you're facing. So you're a board of a global company, and you're going to be asked to vote on a decision that the company is making. And we recognize that we are now in a place where we are going to have a slightly disorderly transition, let's face it, through into the next next couple of decades. And so you're as a board being asked to take this decision on the basis of that recognition that we are in a world of a disorderly transition. And I guess in our current real world, that's perhaps not so difficult to imagine. The board meeting that you're about to go into, one of the agenda items is to discuss the flood risks of a new food manufacturing plant that you're looking at. 5 years ago, the board approved the building of the plant, and it's going to be commencing. It was commencing earlier in the year. Last year. There's some information that's been available to the board in the context of the flood risk associated with that site. There's a significant increase in the probability of extreme flooding. You're already halfway through the build. Your insurance has doubled over the last couple of years. But you do expect the government to act. There's been enough conversations going on about flooding and the flood risks to a number of different assets from a number of different businesses. And so the government is well aware of flooding risk to a number of different assets, including the location where your manufacturing plant is due to be built. And the diagram is just illustrative to show the flood risk in the context of the different current 1 in 500, 1 in 100 that the insurance sector use to do their maths to set your insurance policy costs. So you're in a boardroom, you've got that information, and you're being asked to vote. Do you vote for option 1? Do you go ahead with your construction plans? Obviously, you've kind of got a lot of sunk costs in there. A lot of your orders possibly relying on the new plant to be in place. But a significant amount of risk and a significant amount of cost also potentially in the longer term. Or do you delay construction until further assessments can be made, until perhaps you hear a little bit more about what the government's planning? The risks there are maybe, are you going to lose that big customer contract that you said that you would be able to deliver on? Are you going to miss out on being able to pay a supplier that you've already set a long-term contract with? So whichever way you look at these decisions, there are challenges. And again, I appreciate this is going to take a little bit of creativity, a little bit of role play in terms of imagining what other information will, surround this. So please, go for it. Just, make up the scenario in the context of the board that that you feel comfortable with. I think what we're trying to do here, as I'm sure you can see, is put you in a real life context. Boards don't have easy decisions to make. No matter which way they look, there's always going to be a trade-off. And it's getting more challenging because sometimes there's not always the other actors or the other pieces in place that are there to help make the decisions. The buck stops with the board. So this is the decision that you need to be thinking about. We have a couple of sort of thoughts on, when you report back, what would be really helpful is, number one, which option that you decided on, but more importantly, why? Why did you come to that conclusion in the discussion that you're having in your group? And if in any way, thinking about the principle structure is helpful, if there was a particular aspect of that you think, okay, we're going to make this decision, but we're going to make sure we do this in the context of helping our governance structures, then it would be really helpful to hear, are there any things that you would change with the way that you set up your board, with the way you set up your governance structures, with the way that you might incentivize people, to kind of add to the list of kind of, okay, we're making this decision, but we're going to do this as well. There's no right or wrong answers. We can give as much information or as little as you'd like. You could do a formal presentation or a very informal report back. It's really up to you. This is just to kind of put you in a situation where you're really thinking like a board. I think that was the last slide. So I don't know. I'm happy to, we can flick through other pages if it's helpful. Through the course of the exercise, we'll be kind of circling around. I'm conscious that there's a few people, or rather a few boards that are looking a bit light on the ground, and most times, board meetings need a quorum to make a decision. So I think we need to. I'll just move my bag so that people can. There's a couple of seats down here, so please do come to the front. And those of you that are not going to be able to get on the table, if you could just form groups with your chairs, that would be super. And I think we're going to give you until 1:15. Do we finish at 11:30? We're going to give you until about 11:10, and we'll give you a time warning when we're getting close. And again, not unusual for boards not to have very much time to make these decisions either.
I mean, the CISL. Yes. Doing some short courses there. And I just signed up on something which I haven't had to even look at, because some of them are at your own pace kind of short courses. So I think I signed up something on climate.
We actually now, our new office is in the CISL building. The new kind of like, I don't know if you've been to the new building. Super well. I mean,
Yeah, when I visit, why not?
Yeah, because what they did is, it's a passive house standard, which is pretty impressive. So because it's an older building, they've essentially built the whole new building inside the old. So they couldn't, because of the regulations, they're in a conservation area, so they couldn't touch the facade. But they've sort of built inside to kind of like build in all of the, the natural airflows, all of the energy, the insulation. It's pretty impressive. They won a lot of awards for it, which is ridiculously expensive.
It is. Everything is.
But I think it's again, so you need these organisations to have these sort of, I don't know what you call them, these sort of flagship projects.
Yes.
Even if they make a loss, then they're not there for a commercial reason. But it's also there to sort of show the journey, show what can be done, show what didn't work, what did work, and then other people can learn from it.
It's just like Nestle, our head office in Switzerland. They used to, because we're by the lake, so they used to make water, but they had to excavate underneath and to make sure that the whole system uses the lake water to cool the place down in the summer. So it's quite interesting. A lot of innovative ways to look at things. Okay, let's go around.
Yes.
wider network. This was one of 15 factors. One of those ones. And the other factors,
Hello?
Okay, boardrooms. I'm just giving you a fair warning that you have around 10 minutes or so to start thinking about making your decision and preparing the information you're going to report back. Thank you. Okay, everyone, giving you a minute warning before we report back.
I'm sorry to interrupt your discussions. Very, very interesting. I've been going around table to table and listening to some of the conversations, everything from contractual obligations to reputational risk, you know. So, so I hope you're all ready to report back. Can I have a volunteer to kick off? Which group would like to start? We have 8 groups here. So we don't have to, yeah, we only need a few minutes of reporting back from each group. Would anyone like to volunteer? No? Emily, just pick a group.
So I'm gonna
Test.
So who's reporting back from this group?
Hi everyone. So me and Joshua are going to talk about our decision. So just for the context, we chose option 2, but for the context, we thought about like how it's going to be East Coast flooding, so mainly Pahang area, and that we bought a piece of land in Pahang, and we discussed that flooding is a state government like action, although funded by the federal government, and for our choice, we chose option 2, but it's not just that we're delaying and just sitting down doing nothing. We are going to communicate with the government on what they're planning to do and communicate with the contractors as well as the community and the insurance companies. So although we're delaying this project, we're going to minimize it as much as possible.
And adding on to that, so our action plan is just like what she said, instead of just waiting for these stakeholders, we are actively addressing it. And yes, there will be a delay, but then the delay will be minimized as much as possible. We are planning to have environmental assessment reports, costing reports, and in order to like anticipate the long-term consequences for the 2 options. And we have also planned to speak with different stakeholders and agencies to understand what is the anticipated outcome, and as well as propose flood resilient infrastructure for our second option. And once all these reports are ready, we also plan to take all these reports to and speak with the insurance companies to see if any negotiations can be made in order to reduce the insurance premium. Yeah. So on the bottom line, with all the information that we have, we lean more towards the second option, which is to redesign the construction in a way that we can mitigate the risks, as well as to reduce the losses, the financial losses in the project. And yeah, I think that's about it for our.
Thank you very much for that. Any other group? Or anyone wants to challenge that group? Anyone has questions for that group? I might come back to you shortly.
Test, test. Oh, hello everyone. For our group, we chose the different option, which is number 1, to go ahead with the construction plans. Now, what are the reasons for this? All right, we'll share some of ours. One of which is the first thing that comes to mind is, of course, we have contracts and agreements and deadlines to meet. Okay, that's one pressure point. Second, when it comes to delaying construction, what I've come to understand from other experienced contractors or construction people here is that there's a thing called LEDs, or liquidated certain damages, which is fees for delaying constructions. Some say it goes up to 10%. So if a construction costs 100,000, that means it's 10,000 ringgit per day of delay, for example. Okay, costs are very, very high. Now, if we go ahead with construction plans, what's our course of action? We're going to implement mitigation measures. They were suggesting about redesigning. We would suggest about adding on upon what we currently have. Mitigation measures include both short-term and long-term. Short-term involves seawalls, for example, and long-term involves forest restoration or mangrove restoration, particularly for coastal projects. We were considering about, similar with the other group, collaboration with government and perhaps the National Forestry Department in restoration. However, we also acknowledge the challenges that it comes to when working with government departments and getting funding or support in building projects together with them. Hence, was that we will continue the construction plans, but while construction is moving on, we will also allocate a team towards designing and building these mitigation measures and continuing assessing the maintenance and the effectiveness of these measures. That's all from our input of our group. Thank you. Oh, and one more input.
Thanks. I just wanted to add on. I think when he mentioned about mitigation plans, this could also be used to negotiate or to lower down insurance costs, which we were talking about, because now you have actively reduced the risk. That's one. The second thing is we were having a discussion also in terms of capacity. If we have capacity elsewhere, we should retain it for now, just as a backup or recovery plan. Because if the worst case scenario hits, we will lose our manufacturing capabilities, and then we then also need to pay off any contractual obligations. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. That was a very interesting perspective. Anyone else wants to go next? Okay, here you go. Sorry.
Not so much. I think I'm loud enough.
No,
Not so much one way or the other, but I think this scenario begs the question of how did the board, and over at this table, we hoped we weren't that board, make that decision 5 years ago, right? Because this looks like an utterly not thought through kind of commitment to what I assume would be a pretty hefty investment. Yeah, so there is that. Yeah, and again, I mean, by name Big Co, I don't know how big, and what sort of minority interest we're talking about. But if this leads to the collapse of a mega conglomerate or whatever, it might go beyond just fiduciary duty. It might be legal duties in terms of negligence and all that of the previous board. I won't say this board, the previous board.
Okay. That's really, really interesting, really thought-provoking. Okay, anyone else? You were having a very robust discussion. Maybe somebody. Oh, okay.
Hello. We were having a very intellectual discussion about how do we rank the principles of governance in order to address whether or not to make the decision to delay or to proceed. So we talked a lot about the materiality of the project, whether or not this would cause any sort of material harm to the flow. If it was to cause material harm, what are our abilities and our capacity as the board to change the business model, perhaps, if there's any way to proceed with construction with further enhancements or changes to ensure less physical risk. We also had discussions about how changing the model may change our premiums for the insurance. It was a bit technical and a bit a lot of differing opinions, so perhaps that's reflective of actual board sometimes. But at the end of the day, I think we all agreed that we do need to have more information about the theoretical manufacturing plant that we're building. But we would try to go ahead if possible, somehow.
So you're going for option one?
Yes, but with more fact-finding.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Emily, maybe the group.
Yeah. Anyone from that group?
Hello, everybody. So we, as a board, have decided that we are going to pause instead of using the word delay, right? So in pausing, we are trying to get a cost-benefit analysis, flood adaptation plan, and risk assessment, with the intention of still continuing the project. But I think a lot of what our plan has been said by that group, all the adaptation plans. But one point that I would like to make, because we are such a big company, right? So the flood adaptation plan could be included for the benefit of the community around us. So we could do like an agreement with the government, let's say, do a blended finance maybe to build an adaptation plan for the community. And it's a good opportunity for PR as well. I'm speaking as a board because, PR is very important for a big company. So, yeah, please. Opinions.
Thank you. Maybe this table?
Also, just to add, I think we also had a consideration of trying to avoid first having to do an asset write-off, because that has significant reputational implications to that. Generally, people don't like seeing a big write-off in the balance sheet and all that. Another comment I might want to add on to, a lot of the groups here have alluded to lowering premiums, but a lot of times, me coming from the insurance industry, yes, that is one way to go about it in terms of the underwriting, but sometimes the demand is not even there, right? So we refer to like the coastal areas in the US. They can't even get insurance, and that's a potential situation that might happen in the future for coastal areas as well.
For us, we agree with all of the above, but we just wanted to add a few things. Firstly, of course, we need more information because there's a lot of variables that need to be considered, like what's the funding structure and all things. But in principle, we agree with option one, but conditionally. So number one, we need to know what's the longest period that we can get away with in postponing the project without incurring so much of a cost. And then we also need, because we need to gather information, and this takes time. We need further assessment on the risks. Is this the only risk that is going to be faced by this plant? Because it's at coastal area, are we going to be prone to coastal erosion, typhoons and all those things? Because this is only on flood. Of course, redesigning the infrastructure, engage with the stakeholders, engage with the government, find out what they are actually doing, see where we can work together, find out whether our supply chain and the infrastructure surrounding the plant might be affected or not, because there's no point having the plant still standing there amidst a sea of water. So we just need to find out if those assessments have been made or not. And since it's a food manufacturing, do we actually get the supplies from the surrounding area, the raw materials? And then to also get the management to actually look at, do we have any other proposals that have been passed but not constructed yet, or in the pipeline, to ensure that this kind of risk assessment is being done in those projects, so that in the future the board will not face this kind of similar situation. So that is what we are thinking of.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Okay, go ahead.
Hi everyone. Yeah, so I think what our team considered, we actually did debate both of the options. In the end, we settled with number one, but I think with everyone else, we qualify it. So some of the things that we're considering is, first of all, to work on getting the government or the local state to build a seawall, and then to support that, because of course they need data to back this up and all. We would look at seeing whether we can get consultants to come in to sort of do an assessment and gather the data so that we can go to the government and present it to them and get them to do the infrastructure. But on the side, because of course government will take time to move on these things, internally what we would looking at doing was, I think one of our team members, who unfortunately has left now, was sharing about stormwater management systems and all, installing that in the factories to reduce the risk of flooding. And I think depending on the way we can do it, it can also benefit the community, because with another team member of ours was also sharing like how one of the ways that they have done it in their company is using a field as a flood retention system, and then when it's not flooded, then it can be used by the community, and also using this kind of methods. Because I think some of why we didn't in the end decided not to delay construction is because of contractual obligations, and whether or not existing factories actually have the capacity to support the new contract, and also these are some of the things that we need to think about last. So I think it's supported by what everyone has been sharing. Yeah.
Thank you. All groups have shared? Yeah. Okay. No, thank you very much for all your input. I mean, that was really, really interesting. I didn't expect to have such a diverse, response from everyone. So I think the only thing that we need to do is which principles are helpful in the discussion and why. And I think the group here where you said that there could be what do you call this, negligent on the part of the board, breach of fiduciary duty. I think one of the things that they probably neglected doing is probably materiality, looking at the materiality risks, 5 years ago or whatever it is, or opportunities.
Going on for 20, 30 years. So for them to have made that decision to build something that massive, that close to the coast, yeah.
Irresponsible, yeah. Okay, Emily, would you like to, I don't know, because it's so much, I mean, there's no right or wrong answer, so, I mean, even for me as a board, I think one of the conclusions I had is that aspiring board members here, you can see what kind of dilemma we have when we sit on boards, right? So there's no right or wrong answer. So yeah, Emily, maybe you have some input.
Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you for all of the conversation. And I can tell that, there's been lots of trade-offs between keeping contracts, going ahead, working with the government, working with other stakeholders. So just really interesting to hear all of these different perspectives coming through. So I hope that was useful. One of the reasons that we do these dilemmas with boards is to help people in a situation that might become real one day. And I think that final point that the table over here mentioned around, this is information that people should know about, I should have known about 10, 20 years ago. And so just imagine the conversations if decisions are being made today about these kinds of things and kind of what's going to happen to the future boards that are coming forward, which it feels like all of you are going to be sitting on. So I think that's really interesting. So just thank you for your energy and your engagement. I hope you've all learned something and taken away from this. Just one final thing. I know that you've all got very busy schedules with your masterclasses, but one thing that we were just asking to request you to do is just take a quick survey of the session so that we can feed back to the CGM folks who've been planning all of these amazing masterclasses. So it'd be great to get your feedback. And as Rosie mentioned, if you go onto the Climate Governance Initiative website, we do have a climate governance hub that's got lots of useful information on there, and also an online training tool for those of you that have appetite to learn more about it. So please do go online or reach out to the to your colleagues and the team here in Malaysia about more information on the things that you can get engaged in. But really appreciate your time, and I hope you have another exciting masterclass to go to after this. So thanks very much.